ago, when I worked at City Light, in my background as a pesticide applicator, I had to get recertified every year, and you had to go to classes. And when I started doing that, most of them were held by WSU. They would send the professors over, Art Antonelli and Ralph Byther and some other folks who knew a lot about weeds and insects, and they would come and talk to you, and it was fascinating because they'd teach you all about the insect's life cycle and the weed's life cycle, and then they would recommend what chemicals to use to kill them. And that was the extent of the education. That has changed a lot. There's a School of Organic Agriculture at WSU now too, so their focus has changed. The classes are still existing, but the Parks Department in Seattle runs a lot of them. Other entities do too. Green Gardening Program also, which Seattle Public Utilities sponsors, does some classes on integrated pest management. And those are all good for people who need to keep up their credits. But the focus is more on all of the things I mentioned first about understanding life cycles, which we'll talk about, but also alternative methods to manage that. And so that's the basis of what we're going to be talking about tonight. So here's two definitions of integrated pest management, one a little simpler than the other. I like the Toxopedia definition because it talks about education, and I think that that's a real key issue to being able to use integrated pest management. So you're going to hear it abbreviated as IPM, and that's what we mean when we say IPM. Basically, you're looking at combining techniques to manage a pest, starting with observing, being aware of what the situation is, understanding the life cycle of something, and then if you move into control or management techniques, you're going to be looking at actually doing cultural and physical things first. A lot of these things that are up here, things like this would be a mechanical tool that you would use to get a weed out of a lawn. So you're going to use things like that first, and then your last approach is to use chemical controls. And for me, and we'll talk about this more also, that even includes organically certified chemicals. And I'll tell you why. So here's a little history of pesticide use in the United States. Well, before the United States. So in the old days, very old days, we were using natural substances. That doesn't mean that these are necessarily safe. Heavy metals, as we know, are not necessarily safe for a human being, especially if they get into your bloodstream and you accumulate them. And even not all natural plant extracts are safe. Nicotine, for instance, is Nicotiana is a plant that you can get substance from to spray insects, but it's pretty toxic. So you can see that during the war, World War II, there were chemicals developed. There were reasons for that. There were valid reasons. There were people out fighting wars. There were lots of swamps. There were issues with insects, especially mosquitoes. There were disease vectors. And so they were trying to protect people by doing that. And so all of that was developed. And then after it was developed, there it is. Here's a product. How do we use it? Well, then they decided maybe other people could use this in other ways. And it became more available to the general public and to agricultural uses. So then in the 1960s, when we got more into the Vietnam War, deeper into that, we developed more herbicides to, defoliate, and that then became an issue or another chemical that we could use in other ways. So herbicides have remained popular, and people use them all the time now. As you got further into the 1900s, people began to see that DDT, which was one of the first things that was developed, was not a really safe chemical, and then we should do something about that. How many of you have read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson? So she really was instrumental in identifying that being an issue and that it was poisoning birds and causing problems for our environment. The EPA was formed in 1970, and then DDT was banned shortly following, so it was about a decade in time. And then in 1972, IPM became a national policy. And why that's important is and why it's a national policy is because it was really aimed at governments of cities, municipalities, counties, school districts. You'll still see to this day that all of those folks who manage some kind of government entity that has landscapes have to have an IPM policy. So that's part of the thing. And we had one at Seattle City Light as well.
We still didn't get IPM.
Integrated Pest Management. So the Food Quality Protection Act was passed in 1996. So we're fast forwarding a little bit. There was a little bit of a lull with, big major changes. But we started to see some other things starting to come off the market, like diazinon, and the chlorpyrifos was removed as well. We've seen a lot of herbicides that are starting to be questioned. We're also starting to see even some of the chemical features, parts of chemical fertilizers like phosphorus. Those have been removed from lawn fertilizers as well because they get into waterways and cause a lot of bloom of algae, and then you have deoxygenation of the water, and then the fish can't breathe. So then we moved into more things. And now we're looking at the GMO issues, and there's a lot of people concerned about that. IPM is pretty much widespread use, and even beyond that, organic gardening is becoming more recognized and used and popular. And of course, Seattle Tilt promotes organic agriculture and gardening, so we have a lot of information just about that in general. Here's a few facts and figures. So for all of North America, we use 30% of the world's total pesticides. And then you can see the other countries that follow. Some of the chemicals that are used in other countries are actually banned in the United States. And actually some of the things we use in the United States can't be used in Canada. So Canada's a little bit more progressive with what they're doing. So they actually have laws now that you cannot use a lawn chemical simply for cosmetic reasons. You can't use lawn herbicides just to kill the weeds in your lawn because that's not a good enough reason. So that's very different. I'm not sure that that would happen here in the United States. It'd be interesting to see. A lot of the things that are treated with chemicals are agricultural crops. So those are the things we're eating. And the majority of those are row crops, which would be, the vegetables that we eat all the time. What's really interesting to me are these figures on the right. U.S. crop production, when you look at how pesticide has affected the management of insects over time, 37% reduction each year of negative pest effects, even though we have gone up 170% in our use of pesticides in a 2-decade period. So this is old, these are old statistics, but it serves to prove a point that even though you're using more and more and more, you're still not making a bigger difference. We have more crops, we're using more chemicals, and yet we're not making any better use of that than reducing pests by 37%. So here's the problem with them. They can drift when you spray them. When I worked at City Light, we used to have to spray early in the morning when the wind wasn't up so high, wasn't so strong, and also when there weren't a lot of people around, certainly, on our properties. But we had to be careful because the wind could carry things over, and if you're spraying an herbicide, you can damage all kinds of things. If you're spraying insecticides, you could be spraying and getting onto other people's properties. Stormwater runoff and soil mobility, so they get into our groundwater, they get into the ground. A lot of these things are highly mobile, will move out, and they detect them in our waterways. There's a persistence for some of these things, and somewhat intentionally, if you're using something like a pre-emergent. Do you guys know what that is?
Yeah.
So pre-emergent herbicide is something you would use if you're putting weed and feed on your lawn. There are post-emergent chemicals there which actually kill the weed that you're putting it onto. But there's also things you're putting in there to prevent the seeds from germinating. So that's called a pre-emergent. Those are specifically built to have longevity because otherwise what's the point? You need them to stay active for a while so that the seeds won't germinate for a while. That's how they work. So you have persistence, and then you have some chemicals that just have persistence beyond that, even though we didn't intend it. There's non-specific targeting, like if something drifts, or if you're spraying your plant with an insecticide, you're also spraying whatever else is on that plant. There could be good guys on that plant, like ladybugs. and you're going to kill those as well. The food chain matters because as you spray something and it gets eaten by something else, then it's being carried through the food chain and it goes up. And a lot of these things can be lodged into fat cells in animals, and then doesn't go anywhere. If you eat that animal, then you're ingesting that as well. And then herbicides can actually have effects on soil structure. So if they're used over a long period of time, they can degrade your soil structure. And this is really important in agriculture because your soil needs to have good tilth, which is what Seattle Tilth's name is all about, and be arable and good to grow in. And so if you're destroying that by what you're doing to it, then that's not a good thing. And then, of course, there's all the human health issues. Not to mention, issues to wildlife or to your pets. I've certainly had my share of pets that have had cancer. I don't know why or where they got it, but they're closer to the ground. Kids are closer to the ground. When you spray things on a lawn and you walk around on it, even after it's dried, those chemicals are still there. You track those into your house. There have been a lot of studies done by people who do home health studies about pesticide residue in the underlining of carpet. So if you were to pull the carpet up, the underlayer actually has a lot of junk that gets caught in it. And they found that there's a lot of that coming from out of your yard or from wherever you're walking around that you're tracking in with your shoes. So, it's something to keep in mind. Some of these pesticides are known to be carcinogens. It's not a theory, they've been proven to be so. And there are a lot of them. Insecticides in particular can have a lot of damages to your nervous system. That's part of how they work on insects, and they can affect you that way as well. So again, not a really recent statistic, but a significant one. In the Midwest, when they tested water, you're finding that the majority of them tested higher levels of pesticides in drinking water. So this is water coming out of the tap that people are using to cook with and drink and bathe in, and that's not good. This is something that there's more science around right now. They're doing a lot of research looking at how these combinations of pesticides are working because there's synergistic effects. Nobody really knows what's happening. You mix all this stuff in Puget Sound and who knows, what's really going on out there. The School of, it was through the School of Fisheries, I think, at the University of Washington, took some students out some years ago onto Hood Canal and out into Puget Sound and Elliott Bay, and they did testing of water at different places. And they did it sort of tongue-in-cheek. They were looking for vanilla and coffee and cinnamon and thyme and a couple other things. And these are really common ingredients that we all use in our cooking and we eat every day. And they tracked how much they were finding in water samples over time, and they graphed it all out. And of course, you saw a spike in thyme and certain things, cinnamon around the holidays. The little graph went way up. Coffee out there all the time. And so it seems innocuous when you think about it, but even those things in the water could affect the capacity of salmon to find their way back to where they're going because they navigate partly by smell. And so we're putting all this stuff out there. So the point being that we impact a lot of our environment just by daily activity. And if we can change anything at all, we should. If we can change it for the better, we should be really cautious and aware of what we're doing. So these are other concerns. The bioconcentration and the biomagnification refer to sort of that food chain aspect, or that if you ingest things or you get exposed to things, then over time you get more and then it becomes bigger. And it's sort of logarithmic. It becomes bigger than what you would think it's supposed to be. The manufacturing footprint's a whole other issue. That's, we're making all this stuff and we're packaging it, and in a lot of cases, a lot of things we don't really need, especially for the home gardener. Much of it is not necessary for you to use. So the talk is titled Pest Control, and the brochure that I brought you talks about pest control, and it was written some years ago. And so my take on this is that at one point our whole focus was eradication. We got to get rid of these mosquitoes, they're killing people, we got to get rid of it. And that, that makes sense, it was a good thing. A control came along when we're like, okay, well, we're going to control this thing, but we're not trying to kill everything, but we're just trying to control it. Management is more about looking at how do you build a system that will provide a balance so that you don't have to control or eradicate. So now we've kind of we're looking more at whole systems and how do we build a garden that will take care of itself, essentially. So in the pictures, what you see, that was probably nicotine sulfate. A lot of people have used home-based recipes of nicotine. You just put it in water and you get a solution out of it and you spray it, it kills pests dead. It's very toxic to you too, so I wouldn't advise doing that. The little traps are actually using pheromones to trap flying insects that will be attracted to it. They get in there and they can't get back out. So that's a control method. And then management is more about how do I get birds and bees and other insects into my yard to help me take care of some of this? How do I prevent these things from happening in the first place? How do I stop the dandelions from spreading everywhere if I don't want them there? What are the things I need to do and be thinking about as I create my garden? So there's a lot of the word organic out these days. And I'm sure everybody's seen it at the store, at the grocery store. You look around, it's labeled on everything. You'll see it on some of these products, but you'll also see some other things that I'll show you here in a second. So there's a difference between organic and certified organic. Certified organic is a regulation. It's regulated about how you can label something. It's about labeling. Organic just refers to a carbon-based substance, as we are all organic. So we break down into organic components. It's used on product labels a lot. It can be misleading. It can lead you to believe that it's a very safe product. It doesn't mean that. It just means it's organic. It's made of organic components. Certified organic is letting you know that it's been tested and gone through, panels of things to be able to determine whether this is a safe product to use in organic agriculture or to be able to be sold as an organic product. And there are labels from the USDA, the WSDA, which is here in Washington, or OMRI. This is the USDA organic label. That's WSDA label, and that's the OMRI label. And you'll see the USDA and the Washington State Department of Agriculture one on lots of different things, and they're really concerned too about farming and that kind of thing here in the state. OMRI is one you're going to see as a homeowner with a garden when you're buying products. That's the label you're going to see on things like, I don't know if this has it. Yeah, well, Waltz actually has the Washington State Department of Agriculture's label on it. But a lot of products, and I didn't bring one in, if you go to the store and buy insecticidal soap, it'll often have this OMRI label on it. That's the Organic Materials Review Institute, and they actually test all these products and decide if they're okay to be used. Okay, so here's the steps for IPM. The first thing you want to do is prevent a problem. Create a healthy landscape, don't have the problem in the first place, have a lot less work, have more time to sit and enjoy your garden, and actually do the fun part of the garden. Observation, you have to be actively monitoring throughout the year. Pay attention to your garden. And then intervention, if you need to treat, figure out what your best option for treatment is. It's the safest thing you can do for you and for the environment, and then go from there. And there, what I found is I rarely have a case where I even need to pull out a spray bottle of insecticidal soap anymore. So it's not as bad as it seems. When people are first starting this, it seems a little daunting. So these are all the ways to prevent things. There's a lot of things listed here. That's because this is where the bulk of your work really is in gardening. So it's all the things you would do now. You want to mulch your gardens. Instead of raking your leaves out of your bed and sending them away to Cedar Grove to make into compost that you turn around and come back here to win as a prize or buy at the store, you keep them in your beds. If you have diseased leaves, you're going to want to remove those. So fruit trees would be an exception to that rule. Sometimes there's disease issues with that. Wood chips are things you can get for free from arborists, so that's an option. But these are all of our things. We'll go through a little bit of this. Remove your diseased plants, get them out of there. If something's really bad, get it out of there. You know, people are soft-hearted about their plants. Sometimes the right thing to do is to remove something. So with observation, you want to be paying attention. You want to learn. Here's where the educational component comes in. You can be a little detective. You can be a little scientist. You can learn a lot of things. You can get fun books like these. So I have lots of other books, but this is called IPM for Gardeners. So this is learning all about what IPM is and all the things, you know, all the things we're talking about tonight. How to attract native pollinators. These are two of my favorite books. We'll talk a little bit more about that too, but these are the kinds of things that you want to have in your bookshelf or go to the library. Has anybody been to the Center for Urban Horticulture, Miller Library? Fantastic resource. It's for you guys to use to go in and look at stuff. They have all kinds of books. You can go look things up, learn about a plant, learn about an insect. Librarians know a lot. They have a call line too. You can call them and ask them questions as well. What we're seeing here, you guys recognize this guy? Picture on the bottom here? Tent caterpillars. Do you recognize the picture on the top? This is the adult and the egg mass of the tent caterpillar. So this is what you want to know. You want to know what all of them look like because you're going to be looking for these things at different times of year. And if you want to prevent tent caterpillar issue, you want to be looking for these guys right here. And you can remove those, and then you won't have them. And then you don't have to do anything. Granted, sometimes they're up in the tree, so you get your grandkid or your neighbor's kid or somebody to climb that tree and look for them. So this is also really, you know, not to poke too much fun at that, but it is really a way to involve children in the garden, you know, to get them to learn this stuff because they can help you. They're very sharp, they have good eyes, and they like to do this. So, you know, understand what the different life stages are. There's a lot of books out there that can help you with that, that show the different pictures. One of the good things, too, to look at, and we'll talk about beneficial insects as well, and I know some of you guys were looking at these earlier. This is a little flip chart that shows you who the good insects are, so that you're aware of who you're not trying to get rid of. If you see them or their eggs, you want to, you know, like make them at home, protect them, take care of them, because they're going to help you in managing your insects. So there's a lot of tools out there to help you to do this. Very useful. Unfortunately, that little flip chart is not sold anymore, or not given away anymore. So you can't get it, but it's online as an online version. So here's where you guys get to be the detective and try and figure out what this is. There's your one clue. So this is damage in a lawn. The weather that preceded this being seen really is what told us what happened when we finally figured it out. Any guesses as to what might be causing that?
Freeze?
What'd you say, trees?
Did something freeze?
Freeze? What else? Anything? Collapsed mold tunnel. You guys are both close. Very close, in fact. That's good. What this actually was, this was a couple years ago when we had that really big snow and freeze around December and Christmas. Were y'all here then? And then we had the 104 degree or 7 degree or whatever, 120 degrees in the summer. It felt like. I was working in I was unloading compost bins into a metal storage unit out of a metal truck on that 104 degree day. That was not fun. So big snow melted. Lady saw this in her lawn. She called us, and I got the call and I said, well, I don't know, can you send me a picture? So she sent me this picture, and then I got back on the phone with her and talked to her, and it's a vole tunnel, not a mole, but a vole. And what you're seeing along the white is freeze damage from the snow. And it's up high. You would normally not see this because they're underground, but they came up high because the snow was so deep. So they were trying to move up through the soil level. And you know, it's kind of a one-of-a-kind thing. We may not see this again, or I may never in my lifetime see something like this. And she probably didn't see it in subsequent years either. So interesting things too. You can have fun doing this. So here's some damaged plants. And there's 4 different things going on here. So this is air pollution. Who would think, right? That we would never think of that first. We're always, the thing I've found is we're always looking to the bad guys. The weeds are doing something, or that bug is doing it, or it's a disease. It's often not. It's often a cultural issue. Drought? Good answer. Winter injury. So this shrub, probably some type of boxwood, I would guess, not survived the cold damage. But the plant in front of it is a laurel, and it didn't care. Okay, and there's salt damage. And that's winter injury, so to speak. So it's not from the cold, but it's from chemical damage. And then these are some common diseases you'll see out in the garden. So this is what disease really looks like. You've got a viral disease on a camellia. You've got botrytis. See that a lot on peonies, stuff that's starting to emerge from wet ground in a wet spring. Phytophthora is pretty bad disease, root fungus, that happens in a lot of nursery stock. And this is in a Christmas tree. And then verticillium wilt, which you'll see a lot in maples in the Northwest. These are very common. Some of them can be pretty devastating. Sometimes the solution is removal of a plant and putting things in that resist that. Here's some insect damage. You've got apple maggot. There's the fly, the adult of that. That's something we don't see very often. You can trap for those, and then you can know if you have them. Best thing to do for apples is to cover them with little footies or little plastic bags with the corners cut out. Flies feel with their feet, taste with their feet. They land on the apple to mate. They can't tell it's an apple, they'll fly away. They won't lay their eggs there. The larva will not hatch there, and it will not tunnel into your apple. You can be 99% effective by doing that. It doesn't help you when you have a monstrous apple tree, but you can do partial areas or the low branches and get some good fruit. Sometimes people will strip the fruit for 2 years if you have a severe infestation. The idea about any kind of management of insects is to break the life cycle. So at whatever point you can interject something in there to break it, that's what pesticides do. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. These other things, less serious, aphids on a rose. Who has not seen that? No hands. Okay, good. Those guys can be pulled off with your fingers. You can spray them off with water. If it's really, really bad, you can use insecticidal soap. But again, if you have aphids, you're guaranteed to have predators, good insects. So if you do that, you could be also damaging them. So just be aware of that. If it's not that bad, take care of it initially. The birch leaf miner actually gets in between the 2 layers of the leaf tissue, and you can't really get to it, so pesticides don't help anyway. So picking off the worst leaves. On a birch tree, you're not going to do this, it's too big. But in your vegetable garden, you can see this on a lot of things like chard and spinach. Hand pick those off of there. Sometimes you can use, in a veggie garden especially, you can use things like floating row cover and cover your crops. Okay, you guys know these guys? So who's on the left?
Ground beetle.
Ground beetle. Who's on the right?
Root beetle.
Yay, you guys are smart. So yes, who's the good guy?
The ground beetle.
What does the ground beetle do?
Eats insects.
Okay, ground beetle eats slugs primarily. Love slugs, baby slugs, slug eggs. They also like the same habitat as a slug, so we're often cleaning out, trying to make things not have a lot of debris in our vegetable gardens, but when you do that, you're also diminishing your black beetle population. So keep a little, judiciously placed where it is, so it's not maybe right up against the lettuce, but think about how you're mulching things so that you have some rough cover for a beetle. When you notice these guys, they're running fast because they're trying to get to cover. The other thing is to understand predators. When you see predator insects, they're moving fast. Those are good guys usually. So the guys that are hurting our plants are staying stuck on the plant, eating on it. So that's another clue as to whether it's a good or bad guy. Root weevil. Who has had problems with root weevils? Rhododendrons?
Helleborus.
Helleborus, oh, worse. That's harder with a hellebore because they're close to the ground. Rhododendrons you can limb up a little bit, and you can put like a sticky, you can put cardboard with a sticky substance on it to trap them as they come up. So the idea is to intercept them from getting up on the leaf. You can also plant types of rhodies that have curling leaves. They don't like the curl. They can't get their little mouth parts around there. They're very tough. They're like little armored cars. Even spraying insecticides on them doesn't matter anyway. They kind of roll over and then they roll back and run off again. They're very, very durable. There is some control through nematodes for these guys. So you can get a nematode, a predatory nematode, in a package at the store. Mix that up in water and water it in. You have to have the right conditions. The larvae of these guys need to be present, number one, and then number two, the soil has to be about 50 degrees. But that can help reduce your numbers so you don't have as much damage. Hellebores are a little harder. So other pests, these are common things we see. Slugs and the slug damage. We get a lot of snails now. Snails are more prevalent now than they were 10 years ago. Very common. And they climb more, so that's unfortunate. They get up higher into the plant. Deer damage. Who has deer damage? What do you guys do about it?
Not in my yard. I quit planting tulips.
How about roses?
Don't have roses.
Yeah. Deer love roses. They wait for that bud to form perfectly just before it's going to open. That's the most delicious part of the rose, and then they nip that off. I had a client on Bainbridge Island who had deer. The ultimate solution is to fence the property with deer fencing. So you can protect plants in certain ways. You can also plant things the deer can browse on, that you can distract them from. You can give up some plants to them, and sometimes that helps. So then we got weeds. Weeds. A weed is any plant growing in the wrong place. So we have a lot of horticultural plants that we consider weeds now. Forget-me-nots. People don't like them. They grow everywhere. California poppies, that's another example. Then, of course, we'll talk about noxious weeds, which were also a lot of them introductions, horticultural introductions. Some of them can be very useful. For instance, clover. Who hates the clover in their lawn? You can admit it, it's okay. Okay. A lot of people don't like clover in the lawn. They want the lawn to be one thing. It's very hard to accomplish in the Northwest. Well, anywhere, really. So clover used to be sold as a component of lawn seed on purpose because it fixes nitrogen in the soil, pulls atmospheric nitrogen down into specialized root nodules, converts it, and then feeds your grass. Grass needs lots of nitrogen because it's lots of little leaf blades that need to stay green, and the big component of chlorophyll is nitrogen. So, you need that. However, if you manage your lawn properly and you keep it really, really healthy, you can actually minimize your clover population there so you don't have as much of it and it's not as visible. It's hard to get out because of the way it spreads, so it's harder to manage it with a tool like this. This is a great dandelion puller. You can get clover out too, but you have to go after each little segment of it as well. Annual sow thistle is a weed that has kind of dandelion-like flowers. It grows taller and it has a milky sap, like in the lettuce, kind of a lettucey type plant. It can be a vector for thrips, which are a pretty nasty little pest on plants. They do a lot of damage and are hard to get rid of. So if you see that around, especially a nice perennial garden, make sure you're staying on top of that and pulling that. And dead nettle, have you guys seen this guy? Grows low, has a little square stem, looks like mint. It's in the mint family. It's an annual, but and it's not a bad thing. I mean, it's just easy to pull, but it can tell you that you have a lot of moisture in your soil. So a lot of weeds are used as indicators of what kind of soil you have. Buttercup, it's wet soils. Horsetail, wet soils. Dandelion, disturbance. You can learn a lot about weeds, about your soil, by studying the weeds you have on your property. And that's kind of interesting as a plant ecologist. So here's some noxious weeds. Giant knotweed, giant hogweed. Both of these guys are on the noxious weed list. King County and Washington State both maintain lists. Some things are required for control. Hogweed is one of those. The reason for that is that it's huge. It takes big spaces, but it also has a sap that if you get it on you and you have sunlight hit it, you have phytotoxic effects and you can burn your skin. So it's nasty. And this is in the carrot family, so be cautious of anything in the carrot family. The sap on it, on many of those, actually can have a little bit of that. This is just one of the worst of those that does that. Knotweed is required for control around the Green River, and there's one other area, I think it's out closer to Auburn, and there's one other area in King County they're going to start requiring control of it. One of the reasons they don't require control of weeds like knotweed or blackberry, Himalayan blackberry, things like that, is because they're so widespread that economically it would be pretty devastating to try and manage that and make sure everybody's doing that. It's almost impossible. So, Himalayan blackberry. Has anybody never seen this plant? Himalayan blackberries are delicious, but they take over. They disrupt native vegetation. They're a great rat habitat. Now is a good time to be dealing with them. If you want to dig them out, this is a good time. They're taking nutrients back into their root system. So if you're disturbing them and pulling them out, that's better than if you wait until spring when they're starting to really push their growth out. Scots broom, everybody's seen that, right? Huge issue with allergies with people. I can smell this stuff when I drive by with my windows up. This is also a nitrogen fixer. That's why it colonizes so readily like that. So it's one of the first things that's going to move into disturbed areas. This was brought in as a horticultural plant as well. As was knotweed. Purple loosestrife. Do you guys know this one? This is in wetland areas. It's been a big issue. Interestingly enough, where they've started pulling it out of wetland areas, other noxious weeds now are colonizing that and stuff. So they're having trouble getting ahead of that, trying to manage that. What they found a lot about weeds and different plants that when you have succession growth of something, if something gets disturbed, the forest gets knocked down or the wetland changes, and you have a new plant that comes in, it establishes a different relationship in the soil with the soil fungi or the whatever is under there. There's different kinds of interactions and different kinds of soil biology that happens in different types of soil. So meadow soils and forest soils are different. And so if you, especially like in a forest, you knock it all down, you change the ecology of the soil as well, and it makes it more hospitable to grow things that are more noxious, weedy kind of plants. And so that's part of the case with the loosestrife, is that it's interrupted the natural ecology. So it was first collected in Lake Washington in 1929. That's a long time ago. And in about 20 years, it covered 23,000 wetland acres in Grant County. That's one county. So it's everywhere in Washington State, and it's a big issue. So these are noxious weeds that can be harmful to pasture animals. Who has livestock? Anybody? So in the city of Seattle, a lot of people are raising goats and things like that. If you have goats, this would be a concern. You want to be aware of these plants. People that raise cattle or have horses in pasture. These are very toxic. And then tansy ragwort is a required control plant for that reason. But they can colonize and take over a huge field. Bracken fern, lots of us probably have this in our yards, comes up kind of singly, one by one. It's not the same as the lady fern that makes a little clump and then has lots of little seedlings all around it. But the bracken fern is technically one plant probably under your property that's spread and send a shoot up and spread. It's kind of like those giant funguses, you know, it's like huge patch of ground and it's one plant. So to intervene, if you're gonna intervene, first thing is tolerance. How much can you stand? How bad is it really? We get people who send us pictures of something they're concerned about and there's one spot on a leaf, as opposed to somebody who sends us something that looks really dramatic and has cause for concern. So everybody has a different tolerance level, and it's important to be tolerant so that you're not just jumping at something immediately. It's important to look at it and decide whether it's really something that could be controlled or is it a cultural issue that you need to change. And these are all of the the steps then, you would review your choice of plant, where you put it. You'd evaluate the conditions it's in, try to do something like what they're showing here, pulling off the aphids, and then you go into those kind of safe step first, mechanical, biological, and chemical. And again, even with the certified organic, soaps and oils are often the component of organic sprays, especially, well, even for herbicides. They work, but they're soaps and oils. They can be extremely harmful to wetland areas, to amphibious life, and so you have to be careful of that as well. And again, as I mentioned, if you're spraying something on a plant and you have ladybug larvae or eggs there, you're going to kill those guys as well. So here's some tolerance questions. Which of these things would you be able to tolerate? Any of those? I wouldn't tolerate the two on the left, but instead of doing anything about it, I'd change something. So the azalea, I'd probably just get rid of that plant. It's probably always going to have powdery mildew. It's really prone to it. This is one of the deciduous kinds. There's some that are better than others. You can buy varieties that don't have as bad an issue with it, that are just as pretty. And so I would change it out and do something else. The skimmia on the bottom, this is a placement issue. So if I had the skimmia and it looked like this, it's in too much sun, move it, put it in the shade. You could treat those spider mites, it's pretty bad. You could do a little bit of soap spray on it, put it in the shade, and then it'll recover. It'll look 100% better. The rose I would tolerate. I would prune it, I would treat it better, I would open it up, let some air circulation into it, and I'd pick off the worst leaves. And roses are one of those things people have a lot of emotional connection to, a lot less than you would to an azalea and a skimmia, wouldn't you say? So people have an emotional connection to a rose. Sometimes they're a rose that has meaning to them. It was their grandmother's, it's their grandmother's name. I have a rose, finally died, got hit by the winter, that winter we had. It was in a pot, and it was a rose that was in a pot that my friend gave me who had passed away. So, and he gave me the plant too. So I wanted to keep it. And it was fine. And unfortunately, it was a rose that didn't have huge problems, but even if it had been one of the worst, spindly, disease-ridden roses, I probably would have tried to keep growing it just because he gave it to me. And so that was important. So there's all kinds of reasons why you would tolerate and not tolerate. And then cultural issues. The plant on the left, that's an iron deficiency. So you feed your tree, make sure that your soil is healthy. And I don't mean buy iron and put iron on the ground. I mean improve your soil so that the plant can actually get iron out of the soil. So something's wrong. Something is going on at the soil level that's not enabling this plant to feed itself. The tree in the parking strip, super wet, probably not the best choice. If you can't correct this with engineering techniques to drain that, do something else, or just leave it in lawn. The lawn will love it. You won't probably never have to water it, or not very much. But the thing is that you need to identify what's the issue here and how do you correct that, and reasonably for everybody's time and energy to do things. So here's people washing aphids off, and there's the little weed puller that goes over the plant. Oops. Goes over the thing, and then you yank it out of the ground. They work pretty well. They work really well on things like what they're showing here. I think that's actually, well, that might be a real dandelion. There's the cat's ear dandelions. Do you guys know those? They're fuzzy, and they grow really flat, and they tend to colonize more areas. And I'm a little bit more picky about those than I am about regular dandelions. I break the heads off of dandelions so that they don't seed, and then I pull them out by hand, or a dandelion digger, and I don't worry about them tremendously. But the cat's ear can colonize and really disrupt things. And so here's the apple maggot and codling moth issue. This is a picture of a footy on a tree, on the fruit. You put it on when you're thinning fruit, when the fruit's about yay big, little, and you want to thin your fruit because that's good. You're going to get bigger apples and the tree won't be weighted down as heavily. We won't break it. And you put the little footy over there, twist it on, leave it loose at the end, and the apple will grow into it. The Japanese have been doing this for a long time. They have specialized waxed bags that they use. They're really beautiful. You know, you can go that route if you want. They have 2 layers. So the outer layer is more decorative and it's solid and no light gets through, and then at some point you pull that off so that there's a translucent bag underneath and light can get through to the apple to get color on it. So one of the drawbacks of the nylon footies is the apple doesn't get as colored, but later in the season, when we're past worrying about apple maggot, you can pull them off of there and your apple will color up. The pheromone traps we talked about, the cardboard wraps are a technique to trap the codling moth larva. When they come down the tree, this is the 2nd generation, they have 2 a year. They'll come down the tree and go into the corrugated part of the cardboard because they think it's like apple tree bark, which is really rough. And you can collect them and rip it off and throw that in the yard waste bin and put a new one on. And so you're fooling them, making them happy, but getting rid of them at the same time. You may not be able to prevent that 1st generation damage, but you'll get a lot less damage this way. And the codling moth is less of an issue anyway because they go to the core of the apple and eat the core out. But the apple maggot goes all through the flesh and destroys your fruit. The mealybug destroyer is something you can buy as like a biological tool. You can actually do mail order and get them. And then the lady beetle larva is the little fast-moving aphid consumer that people get really freaked out about. They call us all the time and say, I got these insects. They're running all around my plant. They look like little alligators. What do I do? And I say, you have a party. That's fabulous. You have lady beetle larvae, and they're eating all your aphids for you. So you want to encourage those. Green lacewings you can also purchase and release. They're very fierce little critters. You put the eggs in little cups and hang them in the trees, and they hatch. And the larvae, if they don't have something to eat, will eat each other. So you want to make sure you put them somewhere where they have good food. Otherwise, you wasted your time.
They eat aphids and stuff too, or
Pardon?
What do the lacewings eat? Aphids?
They eat aphids, they eat all kinds of things. Yeah, so we're going to look at that here. We'll go through, we're getting short on time, so we'll go through this a little more quickly. So lady beetles, very, very useful. You can buy them and release them. You can also attract them to your garden. They're pretty active right now. They're probably going back up into the hills. The native ones, they go into the mountains, they go into a log, they get all in a big ball together and sleep. And then when they wake up, they are programmed to fly, which is why when you release them, you want to make sure you do it in the evening and with a water source available to try and keep them in place. Because often you release them and they fly. They go to your neighbors. But then if everybody's doing it, everybody's getting ladybugs, so it works out. They're very, very useful little critters and cute. They bite though. So here's the lacewing. So these are all the guys they eat. They'll even eat small caterpillars. So they're really, really helpful. Spider mites, and that's one chewing on a caterpillar there, which is a lot bigger than it is. They're tough little critters, these guys. These are one of my favorites. These are a parasitic wasp that does not sting, has an ovipositor, lays eggs into aphids in particular, and will actually do this these are all aphid bodies that they've had an egg laid into. They carve when the guy hatches out, develops inside of here, eats out, puffs up the aphid body. These are little husks. They carve a hatch out like a submarine and pop out of there and fly away. And if you see that happening, if you see these guys, leave them alone, don't spray, because they're doing a tremendous amount of work for you. And then here's the nematode that we talked about. Actually goes into the insect body and does the same thing, it parasitizes it. And you need to have the soil at a certain time, and you need to know when the larvae of the pest you're trying to kill is actually in the soil, because if you put nematodes in the ground and that larva isn't there, you're not doing yourself any favors. You just spent a bunch of money for no reason. But here's what you really want to do. Attract them to your yard. So this is where this book comes in handy. Attracting native pollinators. Learn about them, what they like, what they'll come to. They all have a little bit different plant that they like. The parasitoid wasps really like things in the carrot family. So a lot of the herbs that are in the like lovage, parsley, cilantro. If you grow any of those things, let some of that go to flower. You'll bring in lots of predatory insects. You'll also bring in lots of bees to pollinate. And then birds, chickadees eat, their young only eats insects. The adults will actually eat weed seeds as well. So you've got helpers out there all the time. Bats, if you can get them there, are pretty great. They do a lot of insect control, especially with mosquitoes. If you have wetland areas. Here are the 3 families that are the best. You want to intersperse this through your garden. So even in a vegetable garden, don't think about, I have my herb garden, I have my flower garden, but mix it up. Because when you have a plant that's in full bloom next to your squash, and the bees are coming to that plant like a lavender, you'll see, especially bumblebees, which are a great pollinator for tomatoes and squash. You'll see them, and blueberries, you'll see them come in and they'll hover around that and then they'll go over here to the next plant, which is what you're trying to pollinate. So you're gonna get a lot more action out of them doing that. And again, remember, all chemicals have potential toxicity. Always read the label instructions. We get calls from people saying, well, you know, I use twice as much of this weed killer, and it, you know, what do I do now? Say, well, you wait and you leave that piece of ground alone for a while because you just put something on it that's going to be biologically active for a long time, and you need to leave it alone. Inert ingredients are often not described, and those are things that a lot of people have concerns about. So you'll see a lot of, you know, discussion about that in the news about what is in this chemical, their proprietary secret. Sometimes they could be worse than the active ingredient, and we don't know what they are. You can get the MSDS, which is the Material Safety Data Sheet of any of these things online or from the manufacturer or from the store. You should be able to get it where you buy it so you can learn more about it. It's very important. We're going to skip that. And then this is a tree that's riddled with woodpecker holes. So woodpeckers have their place. There is one bird in the Northwest, the sapsucker. Have you guys ever seen that? It's in the woodpecker family. They actually like healthy trees. Generally, a bird like this is in a tree because it's declining and there's insect eggs and damage in it, and that's what they're looking for. But the sapsuckers are really after the sap, so they're going to go into a tree that's healthy. And so, again, knowing the difference between who's in your yard and which one's a pest and which one could be doing helpful things, or which one is an indicator telling you that your plant is ill, you know, is important to know the difference. And this is us. So again, as I said, we're a free service. Call us. We're there all the time. Sometimes we get emails from people who have a question at midnight, and you know, you have the satisfaction of being able to send that off while you're thinking about it. But we're there Monday through Saturday from 9 to 5, and we answer the phone. If we're not answering, it's because we're on the phone or in a meeting. Sometimes that happens. Or out doing this.